We've known for a while that things will get hairy for the Boston Celtics, and it seems like we are approaching that sooner than later. Shams was on ESPN earlier today, and he reported that he is expecting, and GMs around the league or teams around the league have been telling him for weeks that they specifically are expecting for Boston to explore trade options as it pertains to this team. Basically, not really going as far as to say blowing it up. They're still focused on contending, of course. They're still focused on trying to win it right now, as they should be. But they are going to be exploring options because of the limitations that are instated with the new CBA and with the second apron rules and all that stuff. And quite frankly, everyone knew this was going to happen. Boston themselves knew this was going to happen. The players knew this was going to happen when they signed those deals. It is what it is. This was always going to be where this went. And Boston's got 5 guys in their team making nearly $30 million. And it's just a lot of money when you have the limitations on the way that you can build your teams up for grabs with that, because too many guys make too much. And then all of a sudden you're freezing draft picks. You're unable to aggregate salaries, all these other things that start to become limitations. And, they said, you know what, screw it. We're going to try to make this just go through for now. We'll keep this team as competitive as possible. We'll deal with that when we get there. And I actually kind of like that approach, to be honest. I kind of do like that approach. But again, it's something that they have to. They're like the anti-Suns, almost, not really, because they did the same thing, kind of, except they didn't trade for a max deal. You know what I'm saying? They have the same strategy, except they won. So, and they've remained good. So it's almost the same thing. But they ultimately are going to have to pay the price on that. We're going to talk about that more today, but make sure you subscribe because 80% of viewers are not subscribed. They're missing out on the content Trevor Lane and I put out on a daily basis as we cover the entire NBA. So firstly, I want to just kind of show you how things look. I was talking about the salaries for Boston. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, they're on multi-year deals. That's fine. You lock your 2 guys up. That's perfect. You've got a great building block with those 2 there. A little bit of sticker shock. I still see contracts that are 60 million plus, nearly 70 million if you're Jason. And I'm just like, my God, these guys make so much money. Drew Holiday there, he's on a deal where he's not 30 this year, 32, 35, 37. For an aging Drew, I think that's quite a lot of money, if I'm being honest. I understand why he's on that, and I do think he deserves it, but I do think we're going to look at that a couple years from now and be like, oh, that's a lot of money, right? Derek White is on a similar deal, just a little bit less. Kristaps, 1 more year at $30 million. So Drew and Kristaps are the 2 that I think they're going to mostly try to explore trading. Kristaps is in a weird position because he's going to be doing a new contract. And what is he thinking he's going to get on the next contract? Is he going to say, okay, I'm cool with 30 million where I've been for a couple years now. Let's just keep that going. Is he going to ask for more? I don't know what situation they're going to be in right there. Horford is also the next guy on the books that they have at a decent number. And I'd expect Horford to retire this offseason. If they win it, he may run it back 1 more time, but I think that he's probably going to retire this offseason. But other than that, I think Pritchard's actually a little underpaid, to be honest. But other than that, they've got some really good salaries on the books below that. But obviously, their top guys, are the ones that are making the most salary on the books, which is what you would expect. But they've got so many guys just with high numbers, right? A lot of teams nowadays have like 1 or 2 guys at best on these big deals. And then the rest of it's all mid-level and below guys. They've got 5 guys at like 28 plus. So that's quite a lot. And then again, if you're not in tune with the restrictions, teams can't aggregate contracts and trades. Teams can't trade multiple players in the same deal. Teams can't send out cash in trades. Teams can't use trade exceptions for previous years. Teams can't trade first round picks that are 7 years in the future. Boston is a second apron team. Again, there's also more in there like draft pick freezing and moving to the back, if I remember correctly. It's so much. And if you're a team, no team wants to be there. In fact, they designed it specifically. So if you're looking at it, you're like, no, we don't want to go there. And the CBA is designed to where these teams are not meant, because of the restrictions that you get to ultimately, they're not meant to be in a position where they can stay at the top of the mountain for very long. They want to have a consistent, new influx of teams that are at the top of the list. And every team is going to kind of approach this as players keep getting more and more money, right? I look at a team like the Thunder, for example, who I think are really, really obviously positioned to win this year and then in the next couple of years as well. But I do expect for them eventually, I don't know if that's 3 years from now or whatever, I'd have to look at their salaries, to come across something similar where you either have to make the decision to trade off some guys and then as a result develop newer young guys to take those places, which is what the CBA wants, or you're going to just reach a point where you're a second apron team and then you're going to have all these other restrictions. You're going to have to live in that area and then eventually still come to the same conclusion anyway as you try to get out of it because it's too restrictive, right? So either way, these teams are all going to be forced there ultimately at some point, one point or another, if they are trying to be a competitive team. Because while these restrictions are in place, as we just saw, the salaries didn't go down or anything like that. The players are still making a bunch of money. So let's go ahead and just pivot over to Shams. And a quick note, I can't manipulate the volume more than it is right now. So hopefully you guys can hear it pretty well. I know myself, I could barely hear this clip.
Fully focused on winning a championship. Like that is the number one focus, repeating. But I can tell you, the rest of the league is bracing for some level of change to come to the Celtics from their roster this offseason. And, you know, sources have been telling me for weeks now that the Celtics will be exploring trade options in the offseason. This team, this iteration just is not going to be sustainable for this team. And no one around the organization, from players to staffers, would be surprised if there are changes coming to this roster. Because when you think about the new collective bargaining agreement, there's restrictions that come with trades. There's restrictions that come with freezing of draft picks. That's all stuff that they're dealing with right now. They have 5 players right now scheduled to make $28 million or more next season. That's a league record. So they would have a salary bill of $500 million. That would be league history amount. And I think the Celtics knew when they traded for Jrue Holiday and they traded for Kristaps Porzingis, they'd be staring at this in the face this summer.
All right, so he said 500 million. I'd assume that's what tax as well. That's insane. That's an insane number of salary. It's league history. That's crazy. That's how expensive this team is. So yeah, right now they're at 195 for this year. They get more expensive next year. They balloon to 223. This team is just really, really expensive. And like I was explaining there, it's just hard to exist in that area. They are currently already over the second apron again by 4 million. And that's not the hardest number to get under, but if you have to make it a point to get off of a bigger salary to do that. And I saw people speculating whether or not they'd try to trade for like Kevin Durant or something like that. That's not really what's going to happen here. They need to, unless you can make it work in a way where they're cutting off a bunch of salaries somehow. I don't know. I'm sure there's a theoretical possible way that it's going to happen, but really what's going to happen is they're going to have to break one of those quarters. Or should I guess in this analogy, we'll say dollars. Well, they'll have to break one of those dollars, into some quarters or something like that, just to find a way. They may even have to sell off on somebody, just to find a way to get below this second apron. I think they'd be fine existing in the first apron area. In fact, shedding 15 million is pretty hard to do. So they may just exist there, but you're not dealing with the second apron restriction specifically. And a lot of teams are above the first apron and they manage perfectly fine. So I think if you're Boston, that's probably what you're going to try to do. And I think since you have your 2 stars still on this team, they're still really young. They're just in the middle of their prime right now. I think you can have many, many more chances at it. And you would do a great job retooling around those guys with moves on the fringes. And I do think you've got your core locked up with those 2. And you've got, like I said, Pritchard, you've got White. I am curious about Porzingis specifically because he's due another contract. I think they could keep Jrue if they want to, and maybe move Porzingis, break him up specifically into more depth on the team. Maybe that's something that they'd be better off for doing anyway, because some of their guys are in and out of the rotation. Like I said, I also expect Horford to potentially retire this offseason. All of a sudden, you're staring down needing a couple of bigs on this team. So maybe that's something that they do. I am curious about that, but I'm also curious about the other side of it is who's buying? Who's the buyers out there? Right. I know there are teams on the market that are interested in a big, and I think Kristaps would be able to go to a number of places and be a pretty impactful, 3-and-D, third star type big on a team. I think that'd be great. And then if you're looking for Drew, like I said, I understand the value. He's a two-time NBA champion. He's been big in those series as well. I understand the value. I just am scared of, a couple years from now, Drew Holiday making 37 or so million, whatever it was, personally. But if there's a team that's interested in making a run right now, next year, of course, or maybe even the year after that, I think Drew could be a really good pickup if Boston decides to pivot that way. I think the nuclear option, which I guess it'll be determined by ownership at this point, is to get rid of both of them. I think that may be asking a bit much, but the thing is that, like I said, the current iteration is now that the NBA is incentivizing two timelines, right? We talked about that a lot, like it was a negative, like it was a really bad thing back when like Golden State famously tried to do it a few years ago. They rebounded like extremely well right after, right? By winning a chip. But we talked about it famously like a bad thing. But like that's kind of where things are now. You have to be able to have a constant influx of quality draft picks. And that's why also being above the second apron sucks, because it's hard to get those quality draft picks. So just a lot of different things going on. So hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit that thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think Boston will wind up doing. And check out Trevor's video from today where he talked about the top centers on the market.